Good morning again. The Christmas holiday or holy day is almost upon us. And when I was a young kid, we used to open up our gifts on Christmas Eve. Santa would come, make a visit, and we'd open up our gifts and usually save one gift for the next day, Christmas Day. And then we'd go to 11 o'clock Lutheran church service. It was called the candlelight service. And I always looked forward to that because we had a huge sanctuary and there were candles everywhere. And the lights that were above were dim real low. And it was a real special night. And I always felt so filled with love and with the Spirit. And it wasn't an academic exercise, it was strictly experiential. You felt the presence of God, at least I did. And we always finished the service with this particular hymn, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, alles schlaft, einsam wacht. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. And it's not unlike the experience that some of us have on long meditation retreats, or even one of our Friday 3-hour retreats here, where we're calm, we're relaxed, we start to see things a little bit clearly. The incense is wafting in the air right here. The light is candlelight for the most part. And there's this experience that happens. And if that experience happens, it brings out holiness. It becomes a holy night. It becomes a sanctified night. It becomes a sacred night as we see things more clearly, as we gain a little bit of wisdom. You know, the word holy comes from a German word that means health, well-being, happiness. So when it comes Christmas Eve, I'll probably sing Silent Night to myself because it has special meaning and I can adapt it to my Buddhist practice very, very easily. You know, a lot of people when they're new to Buddhism, or they really don't know much about it, they've done a little bit of reading, I think they equate Buddhism with silence. Silence and meditation, that's what Buddhism is. And I thought that myself too. Even when I took it in college, we didn't talk about the practice of Buddhism. We talked about doctrines of Buddhism, the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, all that kind of thing, and Theravada and Zen. And it wasn't until February of 1987, almost, that could be like 35 years ago now, that I took an introduction to meditation retreat at Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor. And it was a 3-day retreat back then. Friday night, all day Saturday till Sunday evening. And I thought, boy, that's going to be a lot of sitting and meditation, because that's in my mind what Buddhism was about. You do sitting meditation. And indeed, we did meditation. But we were taught that you don't just have to sit. There's lying down meditation. There's standing up meditation. There's walking meditation, not just sitting meditation. And we practiced all of those that weekend. Wow, that was something different. It kind of opened my eyes. There's different ways to do this, to focus the mind, no matter what position your body is in. And then we learned that, guess what? Meditation isn't the only practice of Zen. There are other practices. So we learned prostrations. And we did a lot of prostrations those 3 days. Wow, it's another way of focusing the mind. Prostrations are exceptionally good, as I learned that weekend and through the years, for when you're emotionally upset, when feelings and emotions are running rampant in you. Prostrations are a good way to distract the mind, to focus the mind. And then we learned that there's another way of practicing Zen, of meditative absorption. That's what Zen means. meditative absorption. To be fully absorbed. The I is fully absorbed in the activity. Sitting meditation, there is no I, there's just the sitting. Prostrations as a form of meditation, there is no I, there's just the prostrations. Chanting meditation, there is no I, there's just the sound of the chant. And we learned a little chant called Ma'um chanting, which we've done here before that weekend. And we did a lot of that weekend. And I walked away and it's like, wow, I thought Zen was all about sitting meditation, and there's just a whole lot more involved with it. And a lot of people fail to spice up their practice. They get a little stale. And, my sitting meditation, my mind's all over the place. What can I do? Prostrations are excellent, excellent. Chanting is excellent, excellent. In fact, that's my favorite of all for me. The Eightfold Path, the last two, seventh and eighth step, are mindfulness and concentration. Nowhere in that Eightfold Path does it say silence. There's nothing in there about silence. And in fact, silence can be one's worst enemy. I know a few men who have been put into segregation while they're in prison, my son being one of them. Isolation, commonly called the hole, for usually a few weeks at a time. One fellow was in there for a number of years at a stretch. And if you ask them, silence is their worst enemy. Silence can kill them. Silence can lead them to want to kill themselves. Because all of a sudden, there's none of those distractions. Being in jail or prison, I don't know if any of you have ever been in there, not to stay, but have visited. I've visited a lot of jails and a lot of prisons, not just with my son, but other folks. And boy, they're noisy. The noise is just constant. And you talk to any of these fellows in there, and they said, this is the way it is all the time. And they said, this goes, early into the morning, 2, 3, 4 o'clock. Guys are screaming and yelling and whatnot and playing around. And so initially, when they're in isolation, it's kind of a respite. That silence is kind of golden. It's kind of a beautiful thing. But then it becomes their worst nightmare, and they don't know what to do with it. So it all depends on conditions, just how valuable silence is to one's mind. But nowhere in the Eightfold Path does it say the silence is necessary. It says mindfulness and concentration. And when you're doing prostrations or when you're chanting, you can have mindfulness and prostration and concentration, just like you can when you're doing meditation in whatever position. It's about losing the I. There's no duality. That's what Zen's all about. Meditative absorption. Your I, your ego gets so absorbed in your whatever you're doing. I've told you this before, but when I used to do surgery at the clinic, I mean, that's a truly Zen experience for me, because if I'm worried about myself and what's going on, my focus is not on the animal and what I'm doing. But for me, that was a true Zen experience, to do surgery on animals. You lose yourself and you're just focused on what you're doing, and it's a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, now I'm in so much discomfort that I don't do a whole lot of surgery anymore, because I can't focus on the animal. I'm so focused on my discomfort. Anyhow, we're going to chant. We're going to chant a little chant here in a moment, the Great Compassion Dharani. We're only going to do it once today because of the fact that no, we're just going to do it once. My voice is going, and COVID's still rampant. I see a lot of you have masks on. So we're just going to do it one time rather than the typical 3 that we normally would do. A lot of when we chanted the Heart Sutra this morning, I don't know how closely you listen to it, but we already live in a world that is non-dual if you experience it as such and consider it. It was Einstein that said, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass, and there's some constant that you throw in there. And 1950 years before Einstein said that, the Heart Truth Sutra said, form equals emptiness. Emptiness equals form. Everything that is a form of energy. Is it a wave or is it a particle? Well, it depends upon the observer. But everything is a form of energy. That's all we are. We're just different forms of energy in different forms of condensation. And when we're really condensed together, we have solidity. We got all these things that are solid. And then when the atoms are a little further apart, we've got fluids. And then when they're further apart, we've got gases. And then when the gases are further apart, God only knows what's all out there. I mean, it's fascinating. But we fail to realize that we're just part of this energy system that's moving and shifting and dancing, and that's all we are. We're not so important. Our ego tells us we are, but we're really not so important as individuals. Together we are, but as individuals, we're not really so important. And that's part of the realization in waking up and becoming more aware and becoming, in a term I don't care for that much, but more enlightened. I want to read you something here by Sunim. He was a Jogye monk, Korean monk, who died 10 or 12, 14 years ago. And he was a great believer in chant, using chant as a way of awakening. And he went on a 100-day retreat. And all he did is chant the great compassion Dharma. That was his practice. I mean, he did sitting meditation along the way too, and he ate. And, it's like the story about Bodhidharma. Supposedly Bodhidharma went into a cave and sat there for 9 years, and he was so rock solid in his practice that his eyelids fell off, and they grew tea plants all around him, and, all this craziness, these legends that build up to kind of build up the idea that sitting meditation is really, really helpful and important. The truth of the matter is, Shaolin Temple was just down the road from his cave. And he periodically, as he needed food and whatnot, supplies, he'd go to the temple and get his supplies, and he'd talk with the other monks. He'd teach the Lankavatara Sutra, which is a really important Zen sutra. And he'd teach it to them and talk with them. Then he'd come back to his cave, and he'd cook and do all the other things that you do to survive day by day by day. And he would sit. But he did all these other things as part of his practice too. So these legends that build up, there are some people that hook themselves to those legends and say, this is how it was. And it's like, come on, folks, get real. Get real, So Sangsan Sunim used chanting the great compassion Dharani as his main practice. And on the 99th day, he thought, I'm never going to make it. Tomorrow's my last. And on the 99th day, he was chanting with his moktak, and all of a sudden he said, there was no hymn, there was nothing except the sound of the moktak. That was it. There was just the moktak that he heard. That was all that existed. And all of a sudden he saw things in a whole new way. He experienced a whole different reality. And this is what he wrote on a particular retreat that he was leading, doing keto practice. Keto practice is the practice or the way of energy, considered chanting, and prostrations are keto practice too. He says, quote, one famous Zen master only heard the sound of a rooster crowing and was enlightened. Another Zen master was just sweeping the yard with his broom when his broom threw a rock against a piece of bamboo. There was a loud knock, and he was enlightened. He and the sound had become one. So this matter of sound in Zen practice is really very simple. Any sound will do. What's important is to perceive the sound and become one with it. who do we have over there? Our new Bodhisattva statue. But she or he who perceives the sounds of others. Later on, it was interpreted as here's the suffering or here's the cries of other. But originally, Avalokiteshvara means he or she who hears the sounds of others, who perceives the sounds of others. Sound, that's how we know what's going on. That's how we reach a certain awareness. What's important is to perceive the sound and become one with it. No separation without making I and sound. At the moment of true perceiving, there is no thought, no separation, only perceiving sound. This is the crucial point. So during chanting, perceive your own voice and the voice of others. Perceive this bell or the drum sound and cut off all your thinking. Then your wisdom mind will grow. You'll get awakened and thus save all beings. Zen Master Sung San. Thank you. So I'm not sure what page it's on in all our books here. It might be 9 or 10 or 11. We can keep that going. We're just going to do one verse. Bapeng? We're just going to do one verse. Let's just keep it going. Everybody got it? Well, the one in Korean. Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to do the English one. We're going to do the Korean one. So it's not so much what the words say, it's the intonation, it's the rhythm. Listen to your voices as you're chanting, and listen to everyone else's voices, and listen to the sound of the moktak. Now, if you don't know this chant real well, obviously it's going to be a challenge to keep your eyes on the syllables, and keep it going. This is the chant that we're practicing on Thursday nights here. Okay, ready? The great compassion, Dharani, Shinmyo Jangu Te Dharani, Namo Radhana Dharaya Ya Namakaya Parogije Sebaraya Moji Sada Baya Mahasada Baya Mahagaro Nigaya Om Salbamaye Sudarana Garaya Dasamyam Namakari Daba Imamaya Parogije Sebarataba Niraganta Namakarinaya Mabalda Isami Sabata Saranam Subhanayam Selvaboda Nam Pavamara Misudaram Tanyata Om Aroge Aroga Majiroga Chigaranje Hey Hey Hare Mahamoji Sadaba Samara Samara Harinaya Kuro Guro Kelma Sadaya Sadaya Doro Doro Miyanje Mahamiyanje Dara Dara Tarinare Sebara Jara Jara Mara Mimara Amara Moje Ye Hey Hey Roge Se Nasaya horo, mara horo, hare, panaba, naba, sara, siri, soro, mocha, modaya, medariya, niraganta, kamasa, nasanambara, haranaya, manaksabaha, sitaya sabaha, mahasitaya sabaha, sitayuye sebaraya sabaha, niragantaya sabaha, parahamoka singhamokaya sabaha, panamahataya sabaha, chagarayotaya sabaha, sankasopnane modanaya sabaha, maharaku tadaraya sabaha, pamasaganta isasicheda karina inaya sabaha, nyagara chama ibasanaya sabaha, namo ratana dara yaya namakaya parogije sebaraya sabaha. Okay, now you turn it off. Announcements.